reading of Cruise of the Steamer Corwin. Locate and take notes of the places that Corwin's ship visited. After getting clear of the pack, I proceeded to the westward under sail. At 2:15 p.m., the steamer whaler Orca was spoken, and from her master I learned that but 6 vessels had entered the Arctic, the rest of the fleet being blocked by the ice to the southward of St. Lawrence Island. Such being the case, I deemed that the interests of the government would be best served by remaining in the vicinity of the straits and boarding these vessels as they entered the jurisdiction of the United States. 2 weeks later, the fleet passed into the Arctic on the Siberian side, and therefore it was out of my power to intercept any liquor they might have had on board for trading purposes. Meanwhile, I visited East Cape, St. Lawrence Bay, Diomede Islands, Cape Prince of Wales, and Port Clarence, making frequent but unsuccessful attempts as the ice receded to enter Kotzebue Sound. June 15, at Krusenstern Island, one of the Diomedes, I learned that whiskey had been sold to the natives by one of the whalesmen, but the most searching inquiries failed to discover the name of the vessel or that of her master. At one time, the Indians would say that the ship that sold them the liquor was a steamer, and almost in the same breath declare that it was a sailing vessel with 1, 2, 3, and even 6 masts, that her master was a little man, a big man, and almost anything else they were asked. So contradictory were they in their statements that it was absolutely impossible to gather any reliable information as to the guilty vendor. An armed boat's crew, under the commander of Lieutenant Hall, was sent to the village with instructions to search the huts and seize any liquors that might be found there. On landing, he was surrounded by a crowd of half-drunken Indians, as when informed by one of their numbers where a 5-gallon can of alcohol could be found. This was obtained and brought on board. With the single exception noted, no liquor has been found on the Alaska shore, and judging from the conduct of the natives, none has been landed. The same cannot be said, however, of the Russian side, as at nearly all the settlement visited on that shore natives were seen under the influence of alcohol. Until July 1st, when a heavy gale broke up the ice and drove it to the northward, little could be done. The drifting ice required the vessel to be kept in motion, while the dense fog rendered unceasing vigilance imperative. On the 7th of July, I was able to reach Hottum Inlet, and on the 8th sent a boat's crew in the steam launched to shore, the river located by a boat's crew from this vessel under Lieutenant Story last year. The party consisted of Lieutenant J.C. Cantwell in charge, Assistant Engineer S.B. McLengan, Quartermaster Horace Fireman, J. Lewis, Mr. Miller, a miner previously mentioned, and our native interpreter. Lieutenant Cantwell was furnished with necessary orders, a copy of which is enclosed. Lieutenant George H. Doty, who was to have charge of the expedition, unfortunately lacerated his hand so badly just before starting as to wholly unfit himself for work to be formed, and Mr. Cantwell being available, I placed him in charge. Having dispatched the expedition and landed the necessary supplies for it, we got under way and stood to the westward. After several days hard fighting with the ice, we reached Point Hope on the 17th with the steam whalers, but two sailing vessels had arrived. The rest had been detained by the ice and a dense fog which had prevailed during the previous 3 weeks. On the 18th, the steamer Beta and bark Thomas Pope arrived with mail and supplies for the fleet. The Beta brought up a party of 4 men for the purpose of ascertaining if the coal seams near Cape Sabine could be worked with profit. I understand that an 18-foot seam has been found. The coal is of better quality than has hitherto been mined at this place, and arrangements will be made the coming winter for taking it out. The Beta has 8 men aboard, who are to establish at Cape Smith, 8 miles from Point Barrow, a whaling station similar to those on the coast of California. These people are to remain here all winter. Owing to the continued and determined efforts of the Corwin, and withstanding the lax enforcement of the law regarding liquor permits to vessels clearing for this territory, I am happy to state that the whiskey traffic in northern Alaska has almost entirely ceased. The beneficial effects of our annual cruises are apparent in the changed condition of the Eskimos. Sickness has decreased, the people are better clothed, more attention is paid to their boats, food is plentiful, fur, bone, and ivory for trade are abundant, and the large number of healthy young children in every village dissipates former fears that the race might become extinct. Satisfactory as is the present state of affairs, it can be continued only by constant and united work. If efforts to restrain the trade once cease, the natural appetite of the natives for alcohol, aided by the white man's greed for gain, will soon cause it to revert to its former terrible condition. Most of the whalemen desire to see its total suppression, as it places those men who, from conscientious motives and a desire to comply with the law, will not sell it at a disadvantage with the unscrupulous in competition for the trade in bone, ivory, and furs. The natives fully understand that we come to suppress this trade, and that no liquor can be got on board the Corwin, even if they beg for it on their knees, as they frequently have done. When they see our flag, they point to it and say, in Eskimo, "No whiskey, ship," and in describing us to others, they generally use this expression. Naturally peaceful, of a kindly and hospitable disposition, and seldom, if ever, quarrelsome, when sober, under the influence of a small quantity of liquor, they become demonic. The most brutal fights occur when they are in this condition. Their long, sharp hunting knives make frightful wounds, and their rifles are used without stint and often with deadly effect. In former years, our surgeon has often been called upon to dress these wounds. One of the bodies of several Indians I have seen marked of bullet wounds received in these drunken brawls, and the Amalek of the Diomedes, a comparatively young man, bears 3 deep scars, which he proudly told me he had received in fights, and as proudly boasted of having killed 2 men while drunk.